Dear viewers, tonight's story was not about wealth or fortune, but about something much deeper, something that could not be bought or measured. In 2014, in the historic city of Charleston, South Carolina, a man who had everything most people could only dream of faced the one thing money could never stop: time. His health was fading, his family was gone, and the silence of his mansion grew heavier with every passing day. Yet instead of seeking comfort in doctors or friends, he made a request to someone unexpected: his young maid. It was not a request of love, nor one of work, but something far more dangerous. He wanted to leave behind a part of himself that could live on after he was gone, a secret so private that no one in the world could have guessed. On a stormy night, as rain pounded against the tall windows and thunder shook the walls, he set the stage for a moment that would change both of their lives forever. At precisely 11:03 p.m., the door to his study closed, and the true story began. Her name was Sophie Miller, and at 22 she carried more scars of life than most people twice her age. With soft brown eyes that seemed older than her years and a figure that caught the attention of strangers on the street, she moved through the world quietly, as though afraid to disturb it. She had grown up in foster care, passed from one family to another in small towns scattered across rural Alabama. Each house was different, but the lessons were always the same: never rely on anyone, never expect kindness, and never ask for more than what was given. By the time she was 16, she had already learned how to cook simple meals, patch torn clothes, and disappear into silence when the shouting of adults filled the air. At 18, on the day she was finally released from the system, she carried her life in a single worn backpack. With no family waiting for her and no clear place to call home, she boarded a bus heading east, her ticket bought with the last crumpled bills she had earned from washing dishes at a roadside cafe. The bus rolled through endless stretches of highway until it stopped in Charleston, South Carolina, a city that looked beautiful to her even through the dirt-streaked window. She stepped onto the street with no plan, no friends, and no money beyond the coins in her pocket. Life did not welcome her kindly. She cleaned greasy diners until midnight, folded clothes in second-hand shops where the smell of dust never left the air, and sold flowers on corners under the burning summer sun. She never complained, not once, because each dollar meant survival. Some nights she returned to her tiny rented room and found only stale bread and water waiting. But she forced herself to believe it was enough. When loneliness pressed too heavily on her chest, she whispered into the dark that one day life would change, one day a door would open, even if she had to wait for years. That day arrived sooner than she imagined. An opportunity came when she was offered a position as a live-in maid in a mansion belonging to a wealthy man whose name appeared only in hushed conversations. Few people ever seen him in public, but everyone in Charleston knew of the sprawling estate that stood beyond iron gates and manicured gardens. To Sophie, it felt like stepping into a different world, one she had never dared to imagine for herself. She did not yet know that behind those walls her fate was waiting, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The mansion belonged to Mr. Richard Hale, a man who once carried a reputation of being one of the sharpest investors on Wall Street. At 58 years old, his name still echoed in financial circles, whispered with respect and envy, but his personal life told a very different story. Years of relentless ambition had left him with great wealth but no peace. His marriage had ended in a bitter and public divorce, his wife leaving with a fortune of her own and custody of their 3 children, none of whom had spoken to him in years. What had once been a lively home filled with laughter, footsteps, and family dinners had become a hollow shell. The only sounds now were the ticking of expensive clocks, the occasional hum of the wind through the tall windows, and his own unsteady breathing. The mansion itself stood like a monument to his success, towering over the land with white stone walls, polished wooden doors, and gardens trimmed to perfection. Chandeliers glittered above silent dining halls, marble floors reflected the light of golden lamps, and every corner smelled faintly of polish and wealth. Yet beneath all the grandeur lingered another scent, one that clung to the air no matter how much the maids cleaned. It was the smell of medicine, of old papers, and of a man fighting to hold on to what remained of his strength. His illness, a condition that made him weak and fatigued, had reduced a once powerful figure into someone who moved slowly, leaning against walls, his footsteps dragging in long hallways built for confidence and power. To the outside world, Richard Hale was still a billionaire, a man who could buy anything he desired. Inside, he was simply alone, and loneliness weighed heavier than any disease. At first, Sophie thought he barely noticed her presence. She believed she was invisible to him, just another uniform moving silently from one task to another. But gradually she began to sense something in the way his eyes lingered. When she set down his tea on the polished oak table, she felt his gaze following her movements. When she polished the silver trays or arranged flowers in crystal vases, she caught him watching, not with the cold attachment of a man observing his employee, but with the quiet intensity of someone who had lost much and was searching for something he could not yet name. In that gaze, there was both sorrow and curiosity, as though he was seeing not just a maid in front of him, but a possibility of something long gone returning once more. One late afternoon. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and made every sound echo louder than it should. Sophie stood in the kitchen, dressed in her simple navy blue maid uniform, her hands busy with the dishes stacked beside the sink. The soft clatter of porcelain and the faint hiss of boiling water filled the air, but beneath it all she sensed something else, a stillness that was not her own. She felt it before she saw it, a presence close behind her, heavy and undeniable. Then came the touch. Two hands, firm yet trembling, rested lightly on her waist. The suddenness of it froze her in place, the sponge slipping from her fingers into the soapy water. Her heart raced, beating so hard she could hear in her ears. For a moment, she was too stunned to move, too confused to even breathe properly. The air felt warmer, thicker, as though the room itself was holding its breath with her. She did not turn around. She did not need to. The faint scent of cologne mixed with medicine, the steady rhythm of shallow breathing, and the weight of authority pressed into that single touch told her exactly who it was. She felt words being spoken near her ear, low and deliberate. Words meant only for her. Words that carried an urgency she could not yet understand. The moment passed as quickly as it began. The hands released her waist, leaving a ghost of warmth behind, and footsteps moved away slowly, unevenly, as if each step required effort. She turned then, catching only the sight of him disappearing through the doorway, his figure leaning against the wall for support, his head slightly bowed. Sophie's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles pale against the polished wood. She lifted her eyes to the clock above the stove, the ticking suddenly louder than before. The minute hand crawled forward, and she found herself staring at it as though it held an answer. Why her? Why at night? The questions crowded her mind, circling without pause, and the quiet kitchen felt smaller, suffocating. The ordinary rhythm of her day had been shattered, and though she tried to return to her work, nothing felt the same. The house had shifted around her, and with it, her place inside it. That night the mansion no longer felt like the same place Sophie had moved into weeks before. The air carried a weight of expectation, and every sound seemed louder against the quiet corridors. The storm outside battered the tall windows, rain slashing against the glass, while deep rolls of thunder traveled across the sky, making the crystal chandeliers shiver on their chains. Shadows lengthened along the hallways, and the portraits that lined the walls looked darker, almost alive in the flicker of lightning. In her small room at the back of the house, Sophie sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the clock that glowed faintly in the dim light. The hands crept toward 11, and each second struck against her chest like a drum. Her palms were damp, her throat dry, and her thoughts twisted between fear and curiosity. She knew she could ignore his request and stay where she was, but the possibility of losing her job, the only stability she'd ever known, pressed hard against her hesitation. She wondered what exactly he wanted from her, what truth could not wait until daylight, what reason required secrecy and silence. At 10:59 she rose, her steps unsteady as she crossed the small room. The storm's howling seemed to follow her as she reached for the door. She paused there, her hand trembling against the cold brass handle, her reflection faintly visible in the window across the hall. For a moment she considered turning back, locking the door, and pretending she had never heard his words. But her body moved forward almost without her consent, guided by a mixture of dread and a pull she could not name. The walk through the mansion felt longer than it should. Her footsteps echoed softly across marble floors, past tall windows that glistened with streams of water, past silent rooms filled with expensive furniture and empty air. Every corner she turned seemed heavier with shadows, and every painting on the wall seemed to watch her as she passed. Her heart pounded with each step until finally she reached the tall oak door of his study. The firelight inside cast a faint glow through the crack beneath it, a warm promise against the storm's violence outside. She lifted her hand to knock, but before her knuckles touched the wood, his voice came from within, deep and steady, carrying through the heavy door as if he had been waiting for her. "Come in, Sophie." The door opened to a room wrapped in shadows and warmth. The scent of bourbon lingered in the air, mixed with the old leather books that lined every wall. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, its light painting the room in shades of gold and red. Mr. Hale sat in a dark leather chair, his frame relaxed yet deliberate, dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers. His face was calm, almost too calm, but his eyes told a different story. They burned with something unspoken, something that reached across the room and wrapped itself tightly around her, drawing her in as the storm outside raged against the glass. The room glowed softly in the firelight, each crackle of flames filling the silence between them. Sophie sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. Mr. Hale moved slowly, every gesture deliberate, as though his body weighed more than it should. He poured her a glass of water, the crystal trembling faintly in his unsteady grip, then placed it carefully before her. His eyes lingered on her face with a mixture of weariness and determination, as if he had rehearsed this moment many times but only now found the courage to speak it aloud. When his words finally came, they carried the weight of confession. He spoke of time slipping through his fingers, of doctors' warnings, and the inevitability of decline. He admitted he had lived long enough to see fortunes gained and lost, but none of it had given him the one thing he now desired above all. He said he wanted to leave something behind, something more permanent than money or property, something that would live after he was gone. Sophie stared at him, her confusion plain, the firelight catching in her wide brown eyes. She listened as his voice grew steadier, every word more precise than the last. He spoke of wanting a child, his own flesh and blood, someone who could carry his name into a future he knew he would never see. He said it with a clarity that silenced the storm outside, his tone so certain it left no space for disbelief. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest rising and falling as though the air had thickened around her. The glass in her hand felt suddenly too heavy, and she gripped it tightly, afraid it might slip through her trembling fingers. She could not understand why he would ask such a thing of her, why she of all people had been chosen for this impossible request. When she found the courage to question him, his answer came without hesitation. He told her that from the first day she entered his home, she had carried something he thought he had lost forever. She had brought peace, not by speaking loudly or demanding attention, but through her quiet persistence, her care, and her silence. He had seen the way she worked without complaint, the way she carried pain without bitterness, and to him, that resilience was hope. As his voice softened, his hand reached across the space between them and touched hers gently. His skin was warm, his touch careful, as though he feared she might break if he held her too firmly. Sophie did not move away. She sat frozen, caught between disbelief and the strange pull of his sincerity, her heart aching with the weight of what he had just revealed. The fire burned on, steady and relentless, as the truth settled between them like a living presence neither of them could ignore. The fire crackled steadily in the hearth, its glow casting shifting shadows across the walls. But inside the study the silence pressed down heavier than the storm outside. Sophie sat frozen, her body tense as Mr. Hale's hand lingered on her shoulder. The weight of his touch was neither forceful nor fleeting. It carried intent, an unspoken plea that seemed to vibrate in the stillness between them. Her heart pounded against her ribs, faster with every second, as though trying to escape the storm of emotions building inside her. She opened her lips, searching for words, but none came. Her throat tightened, her breath shallow, while the silence thickened until it felt unbearable. He leaned closer, slowly, carefully, as though afraid the smallest movement might shatter the fragile moment. His face hovered inches from hers, his breath warm against her cheek, each second stretching into eternity. Sophie's hands gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles pale, her pulse racing. The room itself seemed to lean toward them, the fire dimming, the storm outside momentarily forgotten. When his voice finally came, it was a whisper almost swallowed by the air. He urged her to say something, anything, but her body refused to respond. Only a fractured breath escaped her lips, her mind unable to shape thoughts into words. He reassured her softly, telling her she did not need to speak. She only needed to stay. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming, the closeness undeniable, their lips hovering at the edge of something that could never be undone. Then the world broke. A sudden crash echoed through the hallway beyond the study, so loud it startled her to her feet. The heavy oak door rattled violently on its hinges, as though struck by an unseen force. Sophie's breath caught, her chest tightening as fear rose like a tide inside her. She turned toward the sound, her body trembling, the warmth of the fire replaced by a sharp chill that crawled across her skin. Mr. Hale froze where he sat, his expression shifting instantly from calm certainty to stark alarm. His face drained of color, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on the door with the look of a man confronted by a truth he had hoped to avoid. He spoke in a low tone, his words filled with dread, admitting that they were not supposed to find out. Not yet. Sophie's voice trembled as she asked who it was, who could be pounding against the silence of the mansion in such a way. But his gaze turned to her, his eyes burning with a strange urgency, as though the answer was too dangerous to give. His voice grew steady once more, carrying a gravity that made her blood run cold. He told her that if she chose to remain with him after this night, nothing in her life would ever be the same, that everything she thought she knew would change. The door rattled again, louder this time, the storm outside surging in harmony with the chaos inside. The fire flickered violently, shadows stretching long and sharp across the study. Sophie stood frozen between fear and fascination, her body torn between running and staying. The moment hung suspended in uncertainty, the truth just out of reach, as though the house itself held its breath for what was about to come.